Radio. We're continuing our La Estancia interview series from Cafayate, Argentina, and this week we're sitting down with David Galland. David, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Before we jump into investing and internationalizing, let's take a moment to discuss La Estancia. You were one of the original founders along with Doug Casey in founding this community, and you just completed building a house a little over a year ago. Can you touch on the allure of life in Cafayate for our listeners?
Well, I can only speak for myself, but having traveled the world for 3 years looking for paradise on earth, ultimately I came to Argentina, and once I identified Argentina as the optimal place to be, then it was just a matter of going a little bit deeper, and that's when we discovered Cafayate. So for me, it's got everything I want, which is great weather, 320 days a year of sun, more or less. Very friendly people. Very oddly enough, most Americans wouldn't accept this or wouldn't understand it, but Argentina is an order of magnitude freer than the United States, which is kind of unusual. But here you can do pretty much anything you want as long as you are willing to accept the consequences. Other than that, it's just an absolutely gorgeous place, and like I said, the people are friendly, the weather's great, the food's terrific, and the cost of living here really just couldn't be any cheaper. It'd be free if it was.
Now that you've retired and taken a backseat role at Casey Research, maybe you can share with our listeners a story, and that's how you met Doug Casey and came to work together on Casey Research.
Actually, oddly enough, Doug and I met probably about what has to be at least 30 years ago when I was running the New Orleans Investment Conference. And, Doug and I we got to know each other over the years. He used to be a regular speaker and became friends. And then I got into polo and I got Doug into polo. And then we started playing polo together around the world, including Argentina and Africa, various places. So that's how we became friendly. And when I left Everbank, which is what I was doing before Casey Research, Doug called me up and said, "Hey, can you come work with Casey with me on his newsletter?" I sort of reluctantly agreed, which is kind of funny because the timing was 2004, and it couldn't have been a much better time to get into a business that had involvement in the hard asset sector. So it was a bit of good timing on my part, or good luck on my part. So that's we joined forces. I said I'd be happy to help him out, and that's how it started.
Sticking with the theme of international living, you've spent a good amount of time diversifying across various borders. Generally speaking, what type of strategy do you employ to effectively diversify wealth?
Well, it's something that I came to the sort of a hard realization. Actually, the first sort of seed that was planted with me happened when I was in my 20s, when I was running a business in Louisiana. And the government sent me a check for $2,000 something, and I didn't think I was due a refund, so I contacted my accountant, and he said, "No, you're not doing a refund. So let's just go ahead and deposit it, and I'll look into it." Well, sure enough, about a few days go by, and he gets back to me and he says they made a mistake on their part, and I said, "Okay, that's fine." And then, like the very next day, I got a letter telling me that because of their mistake, I had to give them 20% penalty and interest on the $2,000 because I had deposited my account. So I called my accountant. I say, "What the hell is this?" And he said, "Well, I'll look into it." The very next day, they actually just went into my bank account, and you're talking about a long time ago, and snatched the money out without asking permission. So the seed was sort of planted back then. But I would say that it really, grew into fruition over the last 10 years, when I really came to the conclusion, after obviously reading quite a bit, that it is insanity to have all of your assets concentrated certainly in one political jurisdiction. So that's first. And then secondly, because we live in a world of, I got to say, rigged markets and insider deals, you can't have it in one institution, because look what happened to MF Global. So you've got to have it. And this is what I said about doing. So now we have it spread across asset classes, across jurisdictions, across institutions, across we have trust. It takes a bit to do, but at this point in my life, there's no single. I can't take a single hit from a single bad investment, or a single institution going under, or a single government getting greedy and trying to grab assets that's going to do anything more than be a minor inconvenience. So I would just say you've got to think about like life back in the Weimar Republic, when if you were a German and you had all of your assets in the German mark, you lost everything. But if you had just had right across the border, 10 feet into France, you had had some assets, you would have been just fine. So you have to really think about international diversification, especially today, because you've also got the inflation question that, how much longer can the dollar hold up, and what happens when inflation really gets going. So you've got to move it around.
Speaking of inflation, let's move to precious metals and the junior resource market. What's your general outlook on the resource market into 2014, 2015, and beyond?
Well, realistically, I have no idea. I mean, nobody really does. You have the situation that any sane person would look at and say, okay, can there be a new economic model where you can create money out of thin air and do it to the extent that they have done it this time around, which is totally unprecedented? Can they get away with that for very long? You would think not, but you're talking about a world that is controlled in every little detail by the governments at this point, and so we don't know what they're going to do next. They could do anything, literally anything, including confiscating gold or just any harebrained scheme they could come up with. They can come up with to do whatever it takes to maintain the status quo. So at the least, you've got to have a good percentage of your portfolio that hedges against an inflation, which should come. I mean, by all rational reasons, we should see a major inflation. And a lot of people I really trust, and a lot of our researchers at Casey Research, they look at it and they say, yes, this has to happen, and probably sooner than later at this point. But you never know. So you don't want to go overboard. Some people will go 50, 60, 80, 90% of their money in this stuff and then get killed. So, I have an allocation to precious metals. It's probably in total between physical bullion and stuff against spread in places like Australia and Switzerland. I have probably, totally 25% of my portfolio, but also in mining stocks and, of course, in the physical. So it's probably about half mining stock, half physical. Now, the beautiful thing about today's market is nobody wants to know about these mining stocks. So you have a real opportunity to get involved with financing companies that are worthwhile, and also to be really, really selective of what you invest in. So I only invest in companies that I absolutely am 100% confident in management, that that they've got a big asset they're sitting on. And so you can be very, very selective right now. Everybody wants your money in these little companies. And so you can give it to them, but you don't give it to them, with a half a warrant for 1 year. You give it to them if you get a 2 or 3 year warrant. That would be just fine. And when I get a call from somebody that's tries a half a warrant, or with a acceleration clause, so if it goes from 10 cents to 13 cents, they can cash you out. I don't go for any of that. I'm very selective on what I buy at this point.
And many people don't know this, but Argentina is in the middle of a pretty severe inflation right now. Has living in Argentina given you any insight into what maybe an inflationary situation in the United States could look like?
You'd think that would be the case. I think there's a big difference because Argentina has had so many years. They go through these cycles of inflation, and that the people here are masters at it. They're like kung fu masters at inflation, and they cope. They know how to cope. They know how to deal in tangibles. How they do it. You don't see people worried a lot now. It's starting to pressure certain stratas of society here. And this inflation is probably running at least 40% here. Now, as an American or as a non-peso based individual living here, it just gets cheaper and cheaper. I mean, it's ridiculous. Typically in inflation, the inflation hits, but the merchants are reluctant to raise their prices because they're selling food to their friends and neighbors, and they can't see that a piece of meat should go from 10 pesos to 20 pesos. So they're very reluctant to raise prices. There's a big gap in that as a person who's not a peso-based person, you can really take advantage of it. And I don't mean that in an opportunistic, it's the inflation is what it is. And so you bring dollars and people really want those dollars, and your dollars go extremely far. So, for us, it's been very, very good. And it's also been good to see that people can cope with it. I don't think in America, the U.S. is a lot different because first off, the U.S. has relatively limited experience with inflation, and secondly, you'd be talking about inflation of the world's reserve currency as opposed to the Argentine peso. So what happens when people who look at the dollar, and they do all over the world, as sort of the equivalent of gold. It's like it's the tangible asset. It's the dollar. And so what happens when that dollar really starts to fall apart? These people are going to start unloading those dollars, and who knows what's going to happen next. I have no idea, which again is why I'm so widely diversified at this point.
Are there any other sectors aside from the precious metals these days that you see great growth potential in?
It's a good question. Doug Casey, my partner, he says there's nothing is cheap. There are selective opportunities. For example, I'm keeping an eye on Russia right now. I really think that Russia it's got a lot of assets, it's got a lot of potential, and you want to watch for crisis. I mean, it's a theme that you should always have in the back of your mind. That when something goes really wrong, that you got to step back from the media coverage, which is just ridiculous, and say, okay, what's really going to happen here? Are we going to have World War III over Crimea? I don't think so. So at some point, these companies, which are selling for just ridiculous valuations, the Russian companies, are going to come back. So there's a big opportunity there. I mean, I remember years ago there was a thing where the Chinese Navy was going to sail ships into the waters in Taiwan, and the U.S. sent a fleet out there to intercept them. Clinton was the president at that time. And the Taiwanese stock market got crushed. It went down 30-40%, almost overnight. And you look at that and you say, okay, what, we're going to have World War III over this? Are we really going to get into a shooting war with the Chinese? This is not going to happen. So that was a very good trade. And those kinds of trades come around regularly, because that's the only place that I think you're going to find real value. Although the mining stocks right now, to be fair, the mining stocks are definitely, if provided you believe that there's going to be an inflation, they're definitely worth the speculation.
Well, on that note, David, thanks so much for sitting down and talking with us today. We look forward to catching up with you again in the future.
My great pleasure. Thank you.